Okay, so we're going to try to explain saving and loading in Corona a little better, and also provide a bit more explanation on the week 14 assignment. Saving and loading is important because in most apps, we're going to create data that we want to retrieve at a later time. Or if we're playing a game, we need to keep track of important things like score or lives or level attained or things like that. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this. I've got a sample bit of code here on my screen, and this is to a working app that we're going to take a look at here in just a minute. But in Corona, saving and loading, unfortunately, are not called saving and loading. Corona uses the terms read, write, and append to refer to saving and loading. Once we kind of get the terminology down, then we have to look at the syntax. What type of code and what settings and properties we have to fill in order to get this to work. Okay, first of all, in order to save or load, we need to have something that we're going to save or something that we want to load. But in either way, we're going to require some variables, some data, and a specific format in order to do that. So if we look at this code that I have on the screen, there are basically 4 steps to creating the code for saving or loading. They're kind of opposite processes. First of all, we need to set a path. Within that path will be the file name that we are going to save our data under and the location. Both major operating systems, Android and iOS, restrict access to parts of the file system. So we really only have a few options as to where we can save our data on a mobile device. Okay, for the most part, we'll have the best luck using what is called the Documents directory, and that is built into the system. So we access that by using a command called system.documentsdirectory, and this will allow either iOS to place our file where it needs to go. So if we look at this line, in which my code is line 10, that's where I set my path. And I just create a variable, and it doesn't have to be creative, it's just called path, and I set it equal to this particular format. And you're going to basically use this same thing over and over, with the only thing that's going to change is the file name that you use for your data. And you can make anything you want here. It can be a known file type, like I'm using a .txt in my example, or you can make up your own extension or not even use one. I recommend using a known extension such as .txt or .html, at least at first, because it will make it easier to check if your program is actually saving the data. Okay, so as you can see, my data file in this case is called scoredata.txt, and it's going to be saved into the system documents directory. Okay, and again, that's pretty much a constant. This line is something that we can just reuse over and over and then fill in the name of the file that we want. Okay, once we've created the path, then we need to basically access the file we just created. And that again takes another variable, in which case I just called this file. You can really use any name here. We're using an input-output command, and we're going to open that particular file. There are 2 settings for that. We need to set the path, which we already created, and the mode in which we want to open the file. And there are 3 modes that Corona can use. W, which stands for write, R, which stands for read, and A, which stands for append. And they are all very different in what they can do. Read is the equivalent of load, and either write or append will save your data. They just differ in how they do that. A write command will replace whatever's in the saved data file with your new data. Append will simply add the new data to the end of the existing data file. So if you have 3 items on a list and you append it with 2 more, you've now got 5 items on your list. Okay, once I've got my file open, in this case I've got a variable called score, I've got some buttons and such, and I'll show you how the program works in just a minute, but basically I'm generating a score. If I scroll down my code, I have a function which is attached to what I called the save button. I created the save buttons function here. And again, I'm opening the file. I've opened it in write mode. And I'm going to tell the file what to write. So in the parentheses, I put the variable that I created called score. This can be a constant, it can be a variable, it can be a string literal that we place into our data file. But whatever we save goes in these parentheses. Then I'm telling basically the file to clear out anything extra. That's the flush command. Notice it's open. It just kind of is used to get rid of any excess data or excess information that I don't need. And then I'm going to close the file. Okay, that is the code, and this is very similar to what I sent in week 14 example files. There's a short save example, there's a short append example, and there is a write example as well. If you look in the text, those files match up with what Burton explains in the text also. So now let's take a look at my wonderful application here. Again, it is not anything that you would probably put into the App Store, but it does work, and it would meet the requirements of week's 14 assignment if that was what I chose to do. Okay, so I've just got a couple buttons. I got a reset button here, I have a save and a load. I just kind of chose some randomness here so that they are distinctly different, the load button and the save button. And up here I have this winner button, and if I click that, you can see I generate a score. It just increases by 100 every time I click it. So I'm going to get my score to 2200 there. If I come down here to the save button and click it, nothing appears to happen. Okay, so here is where I want to test to see if my save button actually works. So I hit reset, which brings my score back to 0. If I hit my load high score button, it retrieves my score of 2200. Okay, so that appears to work. Now, in our code, we set two things initially: the name of our data file and the location of our data file in the system documents directory. Now, if you search around your computer, this is very difficult to find. Okay, so what I want to show is how you can access that. If I'm in the Corona simulator, I can go to the file menu at the top, and I can choose Show Project Sandbox. This shows basically the file structure within my application. Now, for most of the things in here, they're either hidden from me or they prevent me from changing them or doing anything with them because they must interact with the operating system. But I can see the documents directory, which is where I told it to save my data. And here is my file scoredata.txt or .txt. So if I just do a quick preview on that, I can see there's my high score, 2200. If I go back to my application here for a minute and I make that 3600, let's just stop it at 4000, and I resave that. If I go back to my data file and look at it, that's now 4000. That's a working save and load example, or more specifically, a write and a read example. So I looked at the save. Here is my read or load code. Now there's one small difference here. When you tell a program to load data from an external file, we need to prepare it for what to do if that file does not exist. Okay, so that in this particular function is a little bit more complicated, but not much. Again, I'm loading the file, I'm opening the file, and this time in read mode with that R. But before I do anything to it, I'm going to check to make sure that there's data in the file. So I just have a simple if file then. And all these three next lines after that will only run if there is data in my file, which basically means the file has been created. If it's not there, nothing's going to happen. Now, this leads to an interesting error that you may get in the simulator that you would not get if your app were completely built and placed on a device. And that is, if I try to load it right off the bat, the file has not been created yet because I haven't triggered any of that code. And I'm going to get an error. Okay, and there's my error message. And, you know, we've all kind of learned this semester that Corona doesn't do a great job of explaining what exactly your error is. And in this case, that's perfect. This is a perfect example of that because it tells me the errors in line 37, and it gives me some, you know, function update text and some other things, but nothing that's really going to help. And if I go back to my code, line 37 is way up here where I'm trying to put the score. Okay, the error and the location don't really match up, but in this case, I just happen to know that is a sort of minor glitch in the simulator that would not occur on an actual device. So how I fix that basically is I save right away, and then I can load without error. But even if I just save a little bit, I can load that back and no errors. So again, to just kind of wrap up, I kind of have to follow this process. We need a path, we need a file, and they're pretty much going to look just like these two lines of code every time. The main thing that will change will be what you call your data file. But if they are different apps, they will each get their own documents directory, so you can keep the same data file name across multiple apps and they will not interfere with one another. Okay, now getting back to my app here a little bit, this is all I was really asking for in week 14. Just creating a simple program that runs, that creates data of some sort and allows you to save it and retrieve it. Hopefully this helped. Email me if you have questions or if there's something I didn't cover here, and we'll see if we can't figure it out together.